Like, what a weird thing to say to your neighbor. Or anyone. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime, Crue Trime, Crue Trime, Crue Trime, Crue Trime. Oh my god! Crue Trime. If you are new here, my name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if you are a certified weirdo like the rest of us, you're in the right place. So make sure you subscribe to this channel and then turn on all of the notifications, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. I am super excited to say that today's story was recommended by a delightful viewer named Darren. Everyone say hi to delightful Darren. Hi! So you guys, Darren knocked this story out of the park. It's truly terrible. The summary that he wrote up about this story was like already 3 pages long, so I didn't have to do a lot. You know, I got a really good head start. So thank you, Darren. You are an angel person. Darren also has a personal connection to this case, but we'll come back to that. So this story is actually quite layered and complicated, but Darren was kind enough to give us a TLDR. So spoiler alert, man kills neighbor, confesses to the crime 2 years later. While in prison, confesses to another murder that somebody else was wrongfully convicted of and had been in prison for like almost 20 years. You guys, hold on to your butts. This is the story of Kaylee Ann Poulton. Also, I don't really talk about the makeup that I'm using as I'm using it, but as always, look in the description box because it's linked just for you. Kaylee Ann Poulton was born on September 20th, 1989 in East Rochester of Monroe County, New York. Kaylee was the daughter of Judy Gifford and David Poulton, who never actually married, but they shared custody of Kaylee, having split up when she was about 3 years old. Kaylee and Judy lived in Gleason Estates, which was a suburban townhome complex, and it was nestled into a wooded area of town. You know, lots of big oak trees, maple trees, all the trees. Kaylee was an only child, bubbly, long blonde hair, and a dimpled smile. On the warm spring evening of May 23rd, 1994, at about 6:45 p.m., 4.5-year-old Kaylee Ann Poulton wanted to ride her pink and white big wheel outside where there were some other neighborhood kids playing. Judy told her that she'd allow it as long as she stayed out front. So Kaylee went outside to ride up and down the sidewalk while Judy stayed inside to work on some errands. She had a second job selling magazines, and she did that so that she could save some money because she was trying to take little Kaylee to Disney World the next summer. Okay, so Judy's inside stuffing these inserts into these magazines that she was going to be delivering later that evening, and the plan was to load everything up in the car, make these quick deliveries, and then she was going to take Kaylee to McDonald's for a little snack and to play at the playland. So it wasn't long at all, like less than a half an hour before Judy was finished, and she popped her head out to call for Kaylee, but she was gone. Judy had a really bad feeling, like immediately. Frantically searching outside, all around the little complex area, yelling Kaylee's name. The neighbors came out and they began helping. And Judy called 911. The fire department showed up. The police came. They came with dogs. There was a helicopter. It was a whole thing. They went door to door. Kaylee and her big wheel had vanished.
People coming home from work. Mom's cooking dinner, the kids playing together. It's just an everyday routine, which is probably the hardest thing because no one saw anything.
Well, that night, Judy did not sleep a wink. She would not stop searching until she found her little girl. And being the last person to see Kaylee, the investigators focused much of their attention on her. I mean, it's not exactly unfair because we know, unfortunately, oftentimes the subjects in these cases are family members. They asked Judy a ton of questions, and as they're looking around, they're not finding anything. There's no signs of struggle, there's no clothing, no blood, no nothing. They had no leads, and Judy was racking her brain trying to think of any information, any little detail, something out of place that could help, and she did think of something. Well, about 20 minutes into this search for Kaylee, Judy saw her 25-year-old neighbor, Mark Christie, who had recently moved into the neighborhood about 6 weeks prior with his girlfriend and their young son, Alex. He was like 18 months old. So Kaylee would sometimes play with the son. So Judy asked Mark if he had seen her, to which he just responded, "Nope," and kept walking. Judy noticed that one of Mark's shoes was missing a shoelace, which was odd. And then, frankly, the guy gave her the creeps. He had told her on several occasions how beautiful Kaylee was. And he was telling Judy that he looks at all the other little girls and Kaylee is by far the prettiest. And he asked her if anybody had ever tried to touch her.
No, don't like that.
Like, what a weird thing to say to your neighbor. Or anyone. Judy was squinting at Mark, and police spoke with him pretty much immediately. Mark Christie was, to be plain, a weirdo. He worked part-time as a security guard at a telecommunications company in Rochester. He had already creeped out Judy by his weird, pervy comments about Kaylee, but it turns out that Mark had a criminal record, although none of his crimes had anything to do with children. He grew up in another suburb called Hilton, New York, and he was a general shithead as a teen, known for killing small animals, which... all the red flags. He was kind of like wormy with police. Arrogant. But he provided a pretty decent alibi, and although the police didn't like him at all, they didn't have any evidence to dispute his claim. So the search for Kaylee was enormous.
By morning's light, police expanded their search to include many of the fields in the East Rochester area. Just over the fence there are some railroad tracks, the same tracks that run alongside the townhouse where Kaylee and her mother live. They continue to be the center of the search.
By the time the next morning rolled around, the case had been reclassified from a missing child to a kidnapping. Neighbors, police, firefighters, and hundreds of concerned citizens joined in the search of the local area. They combed through the woods nearby, they spoke to every neighbor, they searched every home in the neighborhood, and they even searched every car that left the neighborhood. As time went on, thousands of photos of Kaylee were passed out, posted in windows of local businesses, shown on the news every day, and even stuffed into airline boarding passes. But the police had nothing but weak leads that came in from, the hotline. Kaylee's mother and father were cleared as suspects, but the investigators kept digging into the backgrounds of Kaylee's family members and friends, neighbors, and they even started looking at known criminals in the area, like ones that might have had a history with kidnapping or child molesters, you know what I'm saying. But despite their best efforts, the case went ice cold. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. A few weeks after Kaylee Poulton vanished into thin air, that weirdo neighbor, Mark Christie, was evicted from the Gleason Estates neighborhood. Apparently, some neighborhood moms said that they saw him exposing himself to their children.
Disgusting!
Arrest! Was he arrested, you ask? No. Apparently, these neighbors only reported the incident to management, but not necessarily to the police, which I find so weird. Anyway, so fast forward to August 9th, 1996. Mark had been out of the Gleason Estates neighborhood for a solid 2 years. He and his former girlfriend had recently married, and their marriage of about 3 weeks wasn't doing so hot. Mark was just acting weird. They were arguing a lot, and this chick was over it. So they're in this argument, and the wife was threatening to leave, so Mark blurted out that he killed Kaylee.
Sorry, what?
What? Record scratch, right? So what is Mark trying to accomplish by doing this? What do you think was going to happen? The wife was just going to be like, oh, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. You must be dealing with a lot. What? No, she was rightfully horrified. She grabbed her son and hightailed it the fuck out of there. She immediately drove to her parents' house and called the authorities. Well, the police were pumped, of course. They never liked Mark, but they didn't have any information that they could pin on him. And now they were going to have to be extra careful that he didn't lawyer up and zip the lips. So, the lead detective on the case went to see Mark the next day, August 10th, 1996. It seemed like Mark kind of knew the jig was up, I guess, because he agreed to go alone with the detective to go grab a cup of coffee and just chat. He told the detective that he would tell him everything as soon as he spoke with his attorney. And the cop was like,
It's just so stupid.
No lawyer on earth is ever going to allow you to talk to me about what happened to Kaylee. And Kaylee's parents are never going to know what happened to her or if she suffered. And then Mark said, she didn't suffer.
This is what we call self-snitching.
Okay, so after this little coffee chat, they're back in the car driving, but now they're both hungry and they decided to stop for lunch. Well, Mark was just feeling real talkative and he started spilling all of the beans. Well, I mean, as long as he felt like he was the one driving the conversation, he needed to be in control. So this detective is now walking this razor thin line of also keeping his cool and appealing to Mark's ego, to keep him talking and not scare him away. Mark started sharing his feelings about being haunted by Kaylee's pictures that were everywhere for the last 2 years. He also said that he felt bad about what he did to Kaylee. Well, this detective is just like, oh my God, tell me more. But he's trying to be cool. And also, he's disgusted. So the detective tells Mark that, he beat the police straight up, fair and square. He won. He was too clever for them. They didn't have a shred of evidence. No body, no clothes, no big wheel. And Mark perked up. He said he didn't want to seem like he was bragging, but getting rid of the big wheel was pretty ingenious. Can you imagine sitting at this table as the detective with this fucking creep? Anyway, the conversation was detailed, and Mark told him probably more than he should have. But at the end of lunch, the detective took Mark back to his office where he called his attorney, and he was arrested that night and charged with the murder of Kaylee Ann Poulton. What really happened? I'm glad you asked. You might not be glad you asked, though, because it's terrible. So, on the evening that Kaylee disappeared, she had actually gotten onto her big wheel and drove it down to Mark Christie's apartment, unit, house, whatever, because she wanted to play with his young son, Alex. Well, Mark knew that Kaylee's mother, Judy, was very protective and would not be cool with her daughter being alone in his home, but he didn't want to say no either, so he brought Kaylee and her big wheel inside, concealing the bike in his kitchen. Then Kaylee went upstairs and played with his son, Alex. Within a few minutes, Judy was outside calling for Kaylee, yelling out her name, and Mark freaked out. Fearing how Judy might react or what she might do, he decided to strangle Kaylee right there in front of his own kid, by the way. I mean, obviously his girlfriend at the time, later wife, wasn't home. Well, once Kaylee was expired, he brought her body downstairs and laid her down in the dining room, and then he took his young son out to the playground where everybody was searching for Kaylee, so that he would be seen by the neighbors, including Kaylee's mom. Remember that little exchange where she's like, "Have you seen Kaylee?" And he's like, "Nope," keeps walking. That created an alibi for him by the victim's own mother.
Just as I thought. Trash.
So meanwhile, the scene outside is pretty crazy. Police, fire department, neighbors, dogs, helicopters, all this stuff. But Mark easily snuck Kaylee's body out of his house by putting her inside of a large laundry basket with a blanket on top. That was pretty early on and everybody was really occupied, so nobody noticed. And, it would have just looked like he was maybe making a trip to the laundromat. So then Mark, with his son, drove to the Nortel building on Humboldt Street in Rochester where he worked, and he told the other guards that he had left something important inside and he had come back to retrieve it. And once inside, he carried Kaylee up to the roof where there were large tanks of coolant for these massive air conditioning units, 30,000 gallon tanks. He tied a piece of heavy equipment to Kaylee's body to weigh it down, and then he dropped her into the tank. Also, although he did remove Kaylee's clothing to dispose of them, he claims that he didn't do anything else to her body, except, strangle her to death. So Mark kept Kaylee's big wheel hidden in his house for 3 days, and incredibly, the police missed it when they searched. How? Because it was in pieces. Mark knew that the searches of these homes in the neighborhood were consensual. They were just casual look around, open up a closet, look under a bed kind of searches. They weren't digging through boxes and looking for small items. They'd need a warrant for that. So Mark disassembled and cut up that big wheel and hid it in various places all over his house so well that even his wife never found any of the pieces, and he slowly moved them out over time. Well, with this confession, the investigators quickly found Kaylee's body right where Mark said it would be. It was badly decomposed, so there wasn't really any way to determine if Mark's claims were true, that he didn't molest her. Logic says that Mark was very likely in the act of assaulting Kaylee when he heard Judy outside calling for her, which is really what motivated him to kill her. In October of 1997, Mark Christie pled guilty in court to the murder of Kaylee Ann Poulton, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. He is currently serving his sentence at the Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York. A memorial to honor Kaylee's memory was placed in a flower bed at the Giesleman Estates in East Rochester. Kaylee was later laid to rest at the Oddfellows Rest Cemetery in Columbus, Texas. Kaylee's mother, Judy, eventually remarried a man named Floyd Tosh, but never had any other children. But that's not the end of Mark Christie. About 13 years after going to prison for Kaylee's murder, Mark Christie decided to reveal another secret that he had been keeping. So rewind a little bit. November 28th, 1988, 74-year-old Viola Manville was out for her daily walk in Hilton, New York, when she was shot twice in the head with a BB gun and then beaten to death with a railroad tie. Her body was dragged to an overgrown area near the railroad tracks and was later discovered by duck hunters the next day. Her pants had been removed and her jacket was pulled up, exposing, Thelma and Louise. The investigation eventually led police to 25-year-old Frank Sterling. So Frank did not have a criminal record, but his brother Glenn had been convicted of attempting to rape the same woman 3 years earlier in nearly the exact same place that her body was discovered. So Frank actually had an airtight alibi, but the investigators believed that Frank killed her to avenge his brother Glenn. So they zeroed in on him as the prime suspect. Long story longer, Frank was interrogated improperly and made a false confession. He was taken to trial, found guilty, and sent to prison for 25 years to life. Sterling maintained his innocence, recanting the confession as coerced. Coerced? But right before the sentencing phase of that trial, some teenagers came forward with some interesting information. They told police that their pal, Mark Christie, confessed that he was the one who murdered Viola Manville. Also, it turns out that Mark had a BB gun and was absent from school that day and was under investigation as a suspect in an assault that occurred at their high school. But since the police had this confession from Frank Sterling, they dismissed those claims as invalid. Frank was sent to prison, and Mark walked free to murder Kaylee Ann Poulton 6 years later. So, fast forward to 2004. Mark Christie is in prison for Kaylee's murder, and Frank Sterling's case had been picked up by the Innocence Project. They were seeking new DNA testing, and once that was complete, the results essentially excluded Sterling and implicated Mark Christie. Mark would later provide a detailed confession to the crime, including details that only the killer would know. On April 28, 2010, 46-year-old Frank Sterling was exonerated after spending nearly 18 years in prison for something he didn't do. Now, I mentioned that our friend Darren, who recommended the story, has a personal connection to this case. So Darren actually grew up in this area of suburban Rochester, and Mark Christie used to live down the street from his childhood home in this suburb called Greece. And he went to the same high school as his older siblings. Darren said, "My brother used to take shortcuts through the woods in our area to get around, and one of the shortcuts dumped out across from Mark Christie's house. And there was an instance when my brother and his friend were taking the shortcut and they saw him, Mark Christie, killing/hurting cats or other small animals, and he would also bully or beat up my brother's friend, so they stopped using that trail. I was only 6 years old when Kaylee was killed, but I vividly remember having her missing persons picture taped up in the side window of our family minivan." Oh my God. Well, thank you, Darren, for sharing this terrible story. And if any of you guys are in the Salt Lake City, Utah area and are looking for some lovely hair extensions, Darren just so happens to be a very talented hair extension specialist and is taking new clients. So check him out on Instagram. I will link everything down below. And that is the story of Kaylee Ann Poulton. If you want to know any of the makeup that I used in today's look, I did the most today. Just look down in the description box. Everything is linked for you. And if there's anything I used that's no longer available, I will find you something similar. If you have a Crue Trime story that you want to recommend to me, look down in the description box for the link to the Google Doc. Click on it. It will take you to it and you can fill in all the dirty details. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on all of the other socials as well. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! I am so ready to not live in an apartment building with loud ass neighbors anymore. Shut the fuck up! Mark? Oh my god. Telecommunications! Port to the Murdy.